That's fantastic. And then when we get there, what are the implications is another important question, right? Imagine we've done it, which would take a lot of time and
Oh yeah.
effort and struggles, but then what?
Then we are poised to take a giant step forward in terms of eliminating a lot of the suffering that goes on this planet, particularly in what we do to animals. And you know, it's funny. I'm just talking recently with in another interview. We brought up David Pearce's hedonistic imperative and the whole abolitionist movement, which is an extremely radical idea, which is that actually all suffering can be eliminated from the planet, not just to human suffering, but even all animal suffering as well. And you know, obviously, it doesn't take too much time to realize that's probably the most massive project that we could ever hope to undertake. And just logistically speaking, and how complex such a thing would be boggles the mind. But that's my way of kind of answering your question to show that really there is no limit, if you will, in terms of how far we can progress this. Maybe the limit is the fact that we can eventually end all suffering on the planet. But for me, it's an incremental thing, and it's going to have to be one step at a time. So for me, to answer your question, it's that it would bode. It would be doing our part as stewards of this planet, as the most intelligent species on this planet, who we should know better than what we're doing, particularly in terms of our treatment of animals, that we can in fact take these iterative steps to now let's say, okay, if we recognize dogs and cats in this sort of a way, what does that mean that we can and can't do to them, so to speak? Although right now I think that those animals have it really well off. There are a number of animal rights people, including Peter Singer, who are actually opposed to to animal companions. That it's demeaning to a dog or demeaning to a cat to own them and have them live in your house and take them for walks and so on. And this is where we disagree. To me, I don't think the dog feels demeaned. If anything, I think the dog is, knowing dog psychology, it feels part of the pack and part of the whole family, and is engaging in that pack life to the best of its abilities. I think any kind of idea of indignity is a human abstraction, and it's a human labeling of the situation that the dog is not even experiencing. So my concern would be more, I think, not towards animal companions, but more, let's say, animals that are subjugated by us. So, of course, agricultural animals and animals for testing, medical testing, and, of course, performance animals as well. So I think those are the more practical areas that we need to be sensitive to.
Yeah, I was going to say, what would happen with farm animals? What would happen with animals which we use today to conduct certain kind of medical or other experiments?
Right.
And what would that how would that impact our ability to, say, produce new vaccines, new technologies, food to feed our ever-growing population?
Yeah, and at the risk of sounding contradictory, based on the first part of our conversation, basically reverting back to meat eating, I don't necessarily feel that extracting meat from living, thinking creatures is the way to continue in the future. I think certainly now it's how I choose to get my meat, but I don't necessarily feel that I'd like to continue that practice indefinitely into the future. There are other options, particularly from an agriculture perspective, in addition to, let's say, the lab-grown meat idea that we discussed. You can also, let's say, engineer agriculture such that they don't have any conscious awareness, so that you basically create brainless pigs and brainless cows. They can't possibly feel. There's no emotional, maybe not brainless, but those parts of the brain are gone. Mm-hmm. So they're just machines, if you will, that are making meat on themselves. Again, that might seem really disgusting or distasteful to some, but hey, okay, let's lose the yuck factor element of it and think of it from a practical perspective, from a consequentialist perspective. What harm is being done to a cow that actually cannot feel the capacity to be harmed? It has no brain. That's kind of, I think, maybe some engineering, genetic engineering, and some really experimental engineering in that sense might be the way to go. Now, to answer your question about medical testing, again, that's a big one. I think already this is an issue for today, because we're progressively experimenting less and less on animals, except unfortunately in the United States, where it's still a bit out of control. They still test on some of the on primates and so on. But what they're trying to do in its place is set up computer modeling and other types of analogs, such that we don't actually have to test on a living, breathing, feeling creature, and that we can actually just use our computer sciences to get us the same sorts of results. I also think that we should open up the door to more human testing, to volunteer testing, where you have actual consent. We don't have the consent of these animals, but you can have, let's say, somebody who's near end stage of a disease, or somebody who's simply experimental enough, they want to maybe try something. You could get a lot of buy-in that way. So I think there's a number of potential solutions here for that particular area. But I'm not going to lie to you and say that it's not going to, let's say, inhibit or retard the development of, let's say, some pharmaceuticals or other technologies. It clearly will have that impact. But you have to ask yourself, at what cost, though? When you think of the amount of suffering that goes on in these labs, the drilling their skulls open and causing suffering and burning them and all that stuff, it seems disproportionate to me in terms of what it might be actually looking to remedy.
And then, how is that issue connected to the actual or potential issue of animal enhancement in the future, which is one of the sort of notable transhumanist issues, I think. How are they connected, and in what way, if they are?
Interesting. I'm not sure that they are connected. What I've said, and you're right, I've been an advocate of animal enhancement, also referred to as animal uplift, is the idea that I have here is it's more of a developmental view of the trajectory of intelligence on this planet. So it's more of a look into the deep future, not necessarily, let's say, the next 20 years, but maybe the next 100 years plus. And that's the idea that we are progressively, as a species, moving away from our biological state more towards the so-called post-biological, or even a digital sort of a state. And at the same time, of course, augmenting our intelligence, engaging in perhaps different realms of activity that we were heretofore incapable of engaging in. So, in other words, new spaces of exploration altogether. And I don't necessarily mean in space. I mean more in terms of our digital capacities. And the idea of us going through this transition and at the same time leaving the natural state as exactly that seems a bit off-putting to me, and even a bit distasteful. That the concern I have is that why would we allow Darwinian processes to continue when we could kind of put it to an end? That we're kind of past Darwin, if you will. We need to kind of put it out of its misery. And the idea, because why I'm opposed to Darwin and Darwinianism in particular, though, is it's a kind of a crude method for the propagation of and continuation of life, which is basically this whole survival of the fittest mentality, which is devoid of compassion, and it's brutal. It's in the way it goes about what it needs to do. And if you think about all the human suffering that goes on in the world, one can only imagine the kind of suffering that goes on in the animal kingdom. It's incalculable, and this is definitely the concern of thinkers like David Pearson and other abolitionists. And my thinking is that, okay, why don't we bring them along with us into the radical future and kind of reshape the ecology of the planet in a profound way? And this gets into some what's referred to as techno-Gaian ideas, some real progressive environmentalism. The idea that we could completely remold the ecological system of the planet, create a kind of Eden, if you will, where we have exquisite control over so much of its processes. And I'm not saying we can have control of every gust of wind, for example, or every ant colony, but simply that maybe at a 40-foot level we have control over those factors that lead to the emergent effects and chaotic effects that are part of this grand concert that is the planetary ecosystem and ecology. So as part of that, we might want to seriously consider uplifting our animal companions, or not our animal companions, but all of the animals on the planet. Maybe not all of them, like ants may not be worth it. We have to decide at some point, what's the threshold for inclusion into, post-biological existence, and what kind of enhancements would we wish to give these animals? These are all very challenging questions. I'm not going to sit here until I have all the answers, because one risks also kind of like maybe post-humanizing these animals. That's not necessarily the goal here. I think the goal is to simply perhaps endow them with an increased sense of their species and let them kind of take it from there.